In 1975, Steven Spielberg's classic shark movie Jaws came out, and it was a monster hit that had movie audiences all over the world terrified to go into the water. The movie was met with great praise and accolades, as well as sequels. However, the later sequels probably weren't as good. Although I did think that things actually improved by the time we got to Jaws 19, but that's just my own personal opinion. However, in 1990, fans of this classic movie got a chance to get face to face with this legendary movie monster, thanks to Jaws the Ride. Located at Universal Studios, Florida, this epic attraction saw guests go on a boat ride where the boat gets attacked by the menacing Jaws shark in a truly spectacular and memorable experience. As we all know, when Spielberg made Jaws in 1975, the production was plagued with technical difficulties and setbacks. Question is, would the ride suffer the same fate? Well, today we are going to find out as we look into 10 things that you didn't know about Jaws the Ride. Let's check it out.
Jaws, the ride. Attacking every day. Only at Universal Orlando Resort.
Number 10. Dining on the tourists. Although when most people think of Jaws the Ride, they think of the epic boat ride at the Universal Studios in Florida, which opened up in 1990, the true roots of the Jaws ride starts way before that. In fact, all the way back to 1976, 1 year after the release of the first Jaws movie. The ride started as a small attraction that was part of the studio tour at Universal Studios Hollywood, as in the Universal Pictures Studio, which had opened its doors as a theme park all the way back in 1964. The studio tour would often travel to sets from famous movies, of which is where the Bates house from Psycho is located. And given what a huge hit Jaws was in 1975, a movie which created the summer blockbuster, it'll only seem logical that Universal Studios would want to incorporate that into their studio tour. On the infamous ride, tourists are partaking in a leisurely boat ride in the waters of Amity Island, where all of a sudden, Jaws decides to be a dick and gets up close and personal with its excited and possibly terrified passengers. Back in those good old disco days of the Jaws ride, the animatronic shark did actually look pretty good. However, they just couldn't seem to get them teeth right, could they? I mean, look at that. I don't mean to be mean or anything, but they do look kind of comical, right? Oh dear, Jaws, you stay away from me with those teeth, they just don't look right. But don't worry, the teeth would get better as time went on. Number 9. Steven Spielberg was a creative consultant. It was June the 7th, 1990, where the Universal Studios theme park in Florida opened. This was a big and ambitious theme park of its time, one fully dedicated to the public's love of movies and TV shows. In fact, the opening of this park was such a huge event, it was televised and Steven Spielberg himself opened up the park. Yeah, look at him cutting the sign away there with his giant-ass pair of scissors, that's awesome. The park promised many great rides based on many great movies, including King Kong, Back to the Future, and Ghostbusters. So it will only seem fitting that Jaws should be a part of the attraction, of which the Jaws ride was added, only it was bigger and better and more ambitious than the Jaws segment that was previously seen in the studio tour. Yep, the Jaws ride at Florida was designed to be one epic ride. In fact, Steven Spielberg himself was brought on board as a creative consultant for the ride. So yeah, Jaws' director himself helped with the creation of the ride, so that's pretty cool. And he would often visit the Jaws ride attraction and seemed to have a fondness of it. Not only did the ride consist of an action-packed boat ride where Jaws lunges at the guests, but also a loving recreation of Amity Island, with the town being somewhat recreated, of which any loving fan of Jaws is bound to appreciate. I appreciate it, so yeah. Number 8. The Jaws ride immediately broke down during its first ride. So back to the Universal Studios grand opening. It was to be an epic day, and all eyes were on the attractions. So you would hope for the park's sake that it would all be smooth sailing. Spoilers, it wasn't. The Jaws ride was about to set sail for the first time and go on its first ride. This was to be a grand moment in theme park history. In fact, Spielberg himself and his family were on this ride that was to start off this glorious new attraction, and, well, the worst thing that could possibly happen happened. Well, at least that's according to legend anyway, as the ride was forced to shut down. Yep, it had only just started and only just taken off, and it was already shutting down. Now, there are several claims as to what went wrong. One is bad weather, along with oncoming storms which caused the ride to come to a stop. Other claims suggest that the ride simply had malfunctioned. Yep, just after 2 hours of the park opening, the Jaws ride was already seemingly broken. Yikes! Along with the ride's passengers, including Spielberg and his family being trapped on the ride, with them eventually having to be escorted off, creating a situation which probably no doubt looked like a scene from a Jaws movie. The embarrassing first ride blunder wasn't the only controversy in the early days of the Jaws ride either, as the ride itself ended with Jaws exploding, just like we see him do in each movie, to which red dye along with little foam pieces exploded out of the water, which of course was meant to look like Jaws' guts. But some horrified passengers actually thought that shark innards were used for the effect, and they felt really repulsed and sickened by it. Well, it seemed that on the grand opening of the Jaws ride, everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. Look, when it gets to the stage where Spielberg himself has to be rescued from the ride, you know you've screwed up. Number 7. Backstory. Yeah, there's actually a backstory. There is more to this ride than people just going on a boat and getting the bejesus scared out of them by a mechanical shark. Okay, so here is the backstory. After Chief Brody killed the Jaws shark, the events of what happened on Amity Island involving the great white shark became the stuff of legends, which caused Steven Spielberg to direct the Jaws movie, based on the real-life events. Yeah, look, in the ride's universe, the Jaws movie exists. However, because of the shark attacks and subsequent Jaws movie, tourism at Amity had started to diminish, in which an Amity local called Jake Grundy wanted to bring tourism back to the island, so he's now doing boat tours to the locations where Jaws had attacked the tourists, where lo and behold, the shark attacks the boats, hence the events of the ride. But I must know! Whatever happened to Jake Grundy? Did he eventually stop doing Amity tours? Is he alive? And more importantly, did he ever get his hands on Harry's bad hat? I actually don't think Harry's hat was that bad. I think it's all of us who just couldn't appreciate the beauty of Harry's hat. Number 7. The Jaws ride was a technical nightmare. So the ride and general attraction may have seemed like the ultimate dream for any Jaws fans, it was actually more of a nightmare to the theme park, as when the ride opened, it was an absolute malfunctioning nightmare. A pure hot mess of a ride which hardly ever worked. Now, to be fair, the special effects of the ride were very elaborate for its time, but this caused constant breakdowns, many of which would last a very long time. Now, this was a new theme park, so many of the rides were bound to have a few bugs, and they did, including the King Kong ride and an earthquake ride. However, whereas Universal were able to eventually fix up the issues with those rides, it just couldn't quite solve the mechanical issues with the Jaws ride. It is said by legend, and Wikipedia, that it got to the stage that the Jaws ride was evacuated on a daily basis due to the ride just not working or responding. This in turn caused the park to shut down the Jaws ride entirely.
Are you going to close the beaches?
Yes, we are.
Universal would go on to sue the company that built the ride, Ride and Show Engineering, for designing a faulty product that really didn't work. Although they did argue that it was Universal's fault, as they gave them an unrealistic deadline for getting the ride completed within, and not enough time to perfect the complicated mechanics of the ride.
Won't have to take this abuse much longer.
It's funny because most people who I've spoken to about this ride have a love of it and did get a truly memorable experience by riding it. But it seems that in those early days, it hardly worked at all. Number 5. That time some guy fell off the boat. As if the ride's malfunctions couldn't get any worse, there was that one time where one of the passengers could have really been injured. Now, there's something of an urban legend that a ride passenger died on the Jaws ride. Well, that isn't true. This is what actually did happen. In 1990, a 39-year-old man fell off the boat into the ride's lagoon. Although this unfortunate guest wouldn't have been eaten by a real shark, there was still a level of danger thanks to all the ride's underwater mechanics. The man was thankfully pulled out of the water and wasn't seriously hurt. And amazingly, all the other ride passengers gloriously cheered and applauded, yeah! As they thought that this was part of the ride, like as if what they were watching was staged and part of the attraction. It wasn't, and the man who fell into the water didn't see the funny side of it either, where he sued Universal Studios. It is said that the man fell off the ride because of a boat railing breaking. Yep, I guess it was down to the boat.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Now, keep in mind that this happened in 1990, when it was the older, faulty version of the ride, before it had its revamp, and the unfortunate park goer was rewarded $1 million on the grounds of bad maintenance and overall negligence. Despite the fact that the Jaws ride looks pretty intense and epic, there aren't any serious recorded injuries that we know of, except one, just some guy who suffered the humiliation of falling off the boat. Make that a guy who embarrassingly fell off the boat who is now $1 million richer. Wow, imagine being that guy and falling off the boat and actually coming face to face with Jaws. That's kind of awesome! Number 4, the ride's reopening. So it was clear that drastic changes had to be made to this ride in order to make it work. In 1991 and 1992, there were attempts made to fix up some of the ride's glitches, but these efforts were met with zero success. Till finally the park got the services of another ride construction company called Totally Fun, which a further $40 million later would see the ride get a total redesign. In fact, this redesign was described as being a totally different ride, and featured new additions to the ride, such as a gas tank explosion, creating a truly epic Jaws experience. It also featured a severely burnt Jaws, similar to how the shark looked in Jaws 2. Hey, just as long as they don't design the shark on how he looked in Jaws 3D. The ride had officially reopened in 1993, and the event was tended by Steven Spielberg and Jaws stars Roy Scheider and Lorraine Gary. And from here, a lot of the ride's controversies and major breakdowns were pretty much behind it. Number 3. Jaws in Japan. Yep, Jaws is now in Japan, and no, I'm not referring to that movie, Jaws in Japan, as another Jaws ride would make its way to Universal Studios in Japan. This theme park, which is situated in Osaka, opened in March 2001, of which once again its opening was attended by Steven Spielberg. Hey, he seems to really be passionate about his theme parks. And within its first year of being opened, it broke records of having over 11 million guests within its first year, beating a previous record of 10 million. Just like Orlando, the Osaka Universal Studios got a Jaws ride, as well as a Jaws village. The Jaws ride opened up the same day as the park, and I'm going to assume that Spielberg didn't go on the attraction's first ride. Who knows, maybe he did. And thankfully, thus far, to the best of my knowledge, the Japanese Jaws ride hasn't suffered from constant malfunctions, lawsuits, passengers nearly getting eaten by robot sharks, and famous directors getting stranded. In other words, it seems to be doing pretty good. Number 2. In the later days, the ride became seasonal. After local hurricanes in 2004, the Orlando Jaws ride was forced to shut down due to petroleum rising in costs, which was being used for several of the ride's boats and effects. The ride would eventually reopen in 2005, but only every now and then, really only on days when the park had lots of guests, so it was no longer a full-time ride. I mean, I guess you can't really blame the park. It goes without saying that running the Jaws ride would have been a really tough gig for the theme park. It would have required constant maintenance and refurbishments. In some pictures that I've seen, the shark really does look beaten up and in bad condition. And to make matters worse, in 1995, the Jaws ride was reported to an environmental protection agency with a claim that pollution from the ride was leaking into the ride's lagoon, which forced Universal to use non-toxic oil and to perform frequent tests on the water. Look, after all these years of problems, the park had probably had enough of the Jaws ride. So the ride was in a part-time seasonal status, till it was reopened at full capacity in 2007 after many guests had complained about the ride being shut down, where once again it was a frequent popular attraction at the park. However, the ride would come to an end at the hands of an 11-year-old wizard. And before we find out who that 11-year-old wizard was who took down the Jaws ride, here's a bonus entry. The Jaws ride Q video. So there was this really bizarre video that was shown as a Q video on the Jaws ride. Now I've never known what a Q video was until now, so I'll do my best to describe it. A Q video is a video that's played on the monitors at the ride's entrance, while the guests have to queue up in order to go on the ride. In other words, it's an attempt to keep the guests entertained while they have to go through long queues, as well as get them in the mood for the ride, and hopefully less pissed off that they are in a long queue. The video acts as a humorous TV station to Amity Island, which comes complete with comical adverts, where we see this daytime TV show, where its hosts discuss the events of Amity Island and how it inspired the movie Jaws. And what I find the most fascinating about this video is that the quote, real Chief Brody, Matt Hooper, and Quint have guest appearances on the show, where Hooper claims that in real life it was he who actually killed the shark and not Brody, and that this misconception has led his career to sink, where he's now a mere school teacher, where he also has a really bad temper. And Quint also claims that he didn't die when Jaws ate him because Jaws then spat him out. And of course then there's the real Chief Brody, who was annoyed that Roy Scheider played him and not Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I mean, Roy Scheider, come on! Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger, there's a guy who could play me.
Look, it's all very comical and tongue-in-cheek and not to be taken seriously. It's actually a really interesting view for, if anything, nostalgia, and it's up on YouTube for anyone who is interested in watching it. Number 1. Defeated by Harry Potter. So in 2011, it was announced that in early 2012, the Jaws ride, along with the surrounding Amity Island, would be closed down permanently, gone forever from the park. So why did the Jaws ride close down? Well, there are 2 reasons offered. 1, the maintenance costs to running the ride were really getting in the way, but mostly to make way for a new attraction, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, a tourist recreation of the fantasy world seen in the Harry Potter movies, along with rides. Yep, Jaws the ride was being demolished to make way for Harry Potter. The Brody family may have been in a constant battle with the Jaws sharks, but it was ultimately defeated by an 11-year-old wizard.
I mean, I'm just Harry. Just Harry.
Well, just Harry, you managed to defeat an unstoppable shark and close down a 20-year-old ride. That's some bad hat, Harry. The attraction went on its last ride in 2012, and the very next day it was closed up and the demolishing process had started. However, it's not all bad news. The Jaws ride is still going on in Japan, and many people who went on the Jaws ride in Florida still do have loving memories of it, and those memories will last forever, and so will their stories. To conclude, the Jaws ride was quite an achievement. It was one of the most ambitious rides of its time, and it also had to take on many setbacks, malfunctions, and millions of dollars, but it still proved triumphant, and it gave guests an ultimate experience. A chance to get close and personal with Jaws. Wow, what a brilliant memory to have. Oh man, I really wish I got to go on the Jaws ride. I love Jaws, and I would have loved to experience this ride. And sadly, we just don't have theme parks in Australia like the ones you get in the US. This is kind of a weird episode for me, because when I talk about movies, I fully understand the movies that I'm talking about, as I have experienced them. In this case, that didn't happen. I didn't get to personally experience what I'm talking about. So, I can't fully appreciate it. All I can do is listen to the tales of those who did go on this ride, and I will admit those tales do bring me lots of joy. And who knows, maybe one time I'll be in Japan and I'll just go on the Jaws ride there. Yeah, that'll be cool. Anyway, I'm Minty, and I get the feeling that if they ever rebuild the Jaws ride, they're going to need a bigger theme park. See ya! What kind of a joke was that? They're going to need a bigger theme park? Oh, that's really funny. Idiot Minty.